What if your body wasn't just punished, but used as a message to all women who dared to disobey? Imagine a room carved from ancient stone buried beneath a medieval fortress. The air is thick with dampness and secrets. Along the far wall, under the flickering amber glow of a dying torch, stands something grotesquely beautiful. At first glance, it resembles armor, ornate, curved, shaped with intention, but its dimensions are unmistakable. This wasn't made for a soldier. It wasn't crafted for defense. This was built for a woman. Its iron edges align with the softness of the female form. Its purpose, not swift execution, but degradation, humiliation, and pain. The device does not kill immediately. It lingers. It stretches suffering into hours, sometimes days, using the body as both canvas and message. A message sent not just to the victim, but to all who watched. This wasn't justice. It was theater. A macabre performance designed to remind every woman that her body was not hers, that obedience was survival, and silence her only refuge. Before we go further into this dark chapter of history, consider subscribing to History Remains. Your support helps us bring more of these untold stories to light. Because these devices, crafted by men, sanctioned by faith, and fed by fear, tell a story deeper than iron and flame. They reveal how cruelty can be justified, how suffering can be disguised as morality, but who forged such instruments, and why did Europe accept their silence for so long? To answer that, we must begin where it all took root, in a world built on control, shame, and the fear of female power. To understand how a device could be made, specifically to torment women, we must first understand the world that allowed it, no, demanded it. Medieval Europe was not governed by logic or fairness. It was ruled by doctrine, by fear, and by a hierarchy in which women were placed firmly at the bottom. According to religious teaching, woman was not only man's companion, but his burden. She was seen as spiritually weak, morally unstable, and dangerously tied to the physical world. And worst of all, her very body was believed to be a gateway to sin. Eve's original transgression in the Garden of Eden cast a long and damning shadow. Her defiance, her hunger for knowledge was reinterpreted not as a mistake, but as betrayal. And from that betrayal, the logic followed. If woman could fall, she must be watched. If she could tempt, she must be restrained. The church preached it, the law enforced it, and society, generation after generation, believed it. Feudal law did little to protect women. Instead, it upheld a system where obedience was expected and deviation was punished, often brutally. A man might face a fine for violence. A woman might face the whip, the brand, or worse, her crime. Speaking out, dressing improperly, refusing marriage, or simply being accused of immorality by a jealous neighbor or scorned husband. Female sexuality, any hint of independence was a threat not just to a man's honor, but to the structure of divine order itself. In this climate, torture devices became more than tools. They became instruments of spiritual and social control. And as fear of female power grew, so did the creativity in how that power was to be broken. Some devices were adapted to shame women, but some were made for them. From the very beginning, made to fit the body perfectly, made not to comfort, but to destroy. Among the many devices used to punish and control women in the medieval world, few were as horrifying or as symbolic as the breast ripper. Its appearance was deceptively simple. 4 sharp iron claws curved inward like the talons of a beast attached to a handle, or mounted on iron tongs. Sometimes the entire instrument was heated over an open flame until it glowed red hot, the metal hissing and sparking in the air. Then it was clamped directly onto a woman's breast and torn away. This was no metaphor. Flesh was ripped from bone. Nerves, muscles, skin, all shredded in a single motion. The pain was unimaginable. The damage often fatal if the woman survived the initial mutilation. She typically died from blood loss or infection soon after, but in many cases, death was not the immediate goal. The aim was terror, shame, a lesson for the crowd because this was done in public. Accusations of adultery, heresy, or witchcraft often led to the breast ripper. Women accused by jealous husbands, suspicious Neighbors or corrupt priests were dragged into town squares, stripped to the waist, tied to wooden posts, and made to stand beneath the gaze of a community they once called home. Then, before all eyes, her body, her motherhood, her femininity was destroyed. One historical reference comes from 14th century Germany, where local chronicles described the execution of a woman accused of poisoning her husband. As part of her sentence, her breasts were torn off before she was hanged. Another tale, though likely apocryphal, appears in witch hunting manuals like the Malus Maleficarum. The authors encourage torturing women where they have sinned most, advocating punishment that targets the female body with surgical cruelty. But this wasn't just about pain, it was about symbolism. The womb gives life. The breast sustains it. To mutilate the breast was to desecrate the sacred, transforming the very organs of nurture into objects of shame. This punishment sent a chilling message. A woman's power, her ability to give love, to bear life, to nourish, could be turned against her. And if she dared step outside the rigid walls of male-defined virtue, that power would be the first thing taken. But what if pain wasn't enough? What if her suffering had to come from within, hidden, silent, invisible until it was too late? Then came the pear of anguish. It was small, almost delicate. A hollow metal bulb, smooth on the outside, shaped like a pear. But at the turn of a screw, it opened like a flower, slowly, silently, its petals spread apart. What began as an object that could fit into the palm of a hand became a cruel mechanism of internal destruction. This was the pear of anguish. It was not used on thieves or soldiers. It was not designed to break bones or spill blood, at least not at first. It was reserved for those whose crimes could not be seen, women accused of abortion, of sleeping with other women, of speaking too boldly, of refusing a man's advances, or simply of sinning in ways that left no bruises behind. There were different versions, some inserted into the mouth, others into the vagina or rectum. But when used against women, it most often targeted the womb or the voice. Once inserted, the crank was turned slowly, forcing the metal to expand within soft flesh. The tearing began silently. The screams came later. It did not always kill. In fact, it often left the victim alive but broken. A woman might survive only to be rendered infertile, or she might never speak clearly again. The goal was not just pain. It was transformation. To leave her physically altered, marked forever as a warning to others. Imagine the setting. A damp stone chamber. Beneath a monastery. The woman bound to a wooden table. A priest watching. Silently as a torturer turns the screw. Her eyes wide with disbelief. Her mouth open in a soundless scream as the petals open inside her. And around them, silence. No trial, no crowd, just the slow destruction of something sacred. In some cases, it was even performed under the guise of moral cleansing. Church officials claimed it was a way to purify the sinful, but there was nothing holy in its purpose. The pear was not an instrument of justice. It was a tool of erasure. It attacked what society feared most: the woman who could speak, the woman who could choose, the woman who could create, a tool to silence the womb, the mouth, the soul. But some women didn't scream, some endured, and for them society had something worse, something they would wear not just in a chamber of torture, but in the streets, in their homes, and in their sleep. A prison made of iron, shaped like a garment. First glance, it resembled armor shaped to follow the curves of the female torso. It wrapped tightly around the ribs and hips like a knight's breastplate. But this was no protection against violence. It was the violence. This was the iron corset crafted not for battle, but for obedience. A punishment, not of minutes or hours, but of days, weeks, sometimes even months. A cage for the body. A slow war on the breath made from thick bands of metal. The corset was locked shut with screws and rivets. Some versions had spikes lining the interior, pressing into soft skin with every movement. Others were weighted, the iron pulling downward on the spine and compressing the chest. The pressure made breathing difficult. Sleeping was near impossible. Bruising, internal bleeding, and dislocated ribs were common in extreme cases, it caused long-term organ damage, but the purpose wasn't death. It was correction. This device was often used on women who had not yet been convicted of any official crime. Outspoken wives, defiant daughters, suspected witches, women who resisted marriage, defied authority, or simply embarrassed powerful men. And unlike other forms of torture, the iron corset was portable. It traveled with its victim under her, clothes under her skin. She would go about her day working, cleaning, cooking, while her breath came in short gasps, her waist bruised, her lungs aching. Every movement was pain. Every word she tried to speak a struggle. In France and Italy, records speak of young girls forced into such devices for moral improvement. In parts of Germany, they were used to discipline women deemed lazy or impure. Often it was the husband himself who ordered it. No courtroom, no appeal, just metal and silence. And yet, the most chilling part wasn't the pain. It was the message. The corset transformed something beautiful, femininity, sensuality, grace, into something imprisoning. It took the very symbol of womanhood and turned it against her. The body became the battleground. The punishment became the garment. Imagine living inside your punishment, not for an hour, not for a trial, but as your daily reality. And still, for those women who dared to speak too loudly, who challenged not just men, but the very laws that defined their existence, there was something even worse. Because while iron could crush the body, another device was made to crush the voice itself. They called it a bridle, but it had no rest, no saddle, and no escape. Forged from iron, the scold's bridle was shaped like a cage for the head, a muzzle locked around the skull with straps that pressed into the cheeks, the forehead, and under the jaw. But the true cruelty lay inside a spike curved and sharpened, designed to press down on the tongue. The moment the wearer tried to speak, the spike cut into flesh. It was not meant to kill, it was meant to humiliate. A woman could be made to wear it for hours, days, or longer, paraded through streets, bells attached to the side so no step went unheard. Children laughed, men pointed, women turned away. And why was it used? For speaking too. Much for complaining, for gossiping, for challenging a husband, a magistrate, or a priest. In medieval Britain and Scotland, it was the go-to punishment. For women labeled as scolds, a term with no fixed definition. Any woman with a voice too sharp or a mind too strong could be called one. And once accused, the punishment was swift. Court records from 16th century Edinburgh described multiple cases of bridling. In one, a woman was forced to wear the device for disturbing the peace in church. In another, a widow was muzzled for arguing too loudly with a neighbor. No trial, no defense, just silence. The message was unmistakable. A woman's voice was a threat. The spike on the tongue was not just physical. It was symbolic. It pierced through centuries of oral tradition. Wisdom passed from mother to daughter, healer to patient, midwife to bride. It criminalized speech itself. Wearing the bridle meant losing identity. No facial expression, no words, just iron, just the cold echo of your own breath inside a cage meant to reshape who you were. And when it was finally removed, the wounds didn't always heal. Some women never spoke clearly again. Others chose never to speak at all. And yet, despite its brutality, the scold's bridle left no scars visible to the eye, only silence, only shame, only the memory of how easily a woman's voice could be turned into a weapon and then taken from her. But even now, one final device remains. Perhaps the most infamous of all, a machine so terrifying it became legend. But what if that legend was a lie? Few torture devices capture the imagination, like the Iron Maiden, a tall, sarcophagus-like chamber lined with spikes, said to embrace its victim in a kiss of death. For centuries, it has been portrayed as the pinnacle of medieval cruelty. But what if it wasn't real? Historians now believe the Iron Maiden, as we know it, is a myth, an 18th century invention crafted not by medieval torturers, but by museum curators seeking spectacle. There are no confirmed records of its use in the Middle Ages, no court documents, no survivor testimonies. The earliest known Example was assembled in the 1800s in Nuremberg, long after the supposed era of its horrors. And yet, the legend endures. Particularly disturbing are the gendered variations that emerged as the myth grew. Female Iron Maidens, devices, shaped with exaggerated curves, breasts, molded into the metal, the interior, spikes positioned with obscene precision, appeared in paintings, exhibitions, and lurid fiction. These were never used. They were imagined, invented, and perhaps that makes them even more chilling, because they weren't forged in iron, they were forged in fantasy, fantasy where the female body remains, the site of punishment, where suffering is not just inflicted but sexualized, where cruelty is displayed behind glass, with a price of admission. What does it say about us that we made up a torture device just to imagine women inside it? Some museums still display these objects, knowing full well they are fabrications. Some tourist guides still whisper stories of maids in iron being crushed inside them. The myth survives because it feeds something darker than truth. It feeds the idea that women deserve to be punished not only for what they do, but for what they are. Fiction becomes memory. Myth becomes history. And yet, beneath the falsehood lies a deeper truth. Society never needed the Iron Maiden because it already had real devices, real pain, real women whose suffering needed no embellishment. So, why are we so fascinated with pain, especially when it's aimed at women? Maybe because we haven't truly reckoned with the structures that allowed such cruelty to be seen as justice. Maybe because deep down we're still haunted by how easily violence can be made into entertainment. And maybe the Iron Maiden, real or not, still stands for something very real. A culture that turns silence into virtue, submission into law, and womanhood into a cage. These devices were not born from madness. They were engineered, sanctioned, and applied by systems that believed their use was necessary. They were not tools of random cruelty, but instruments of control, and they were aimed with cold precision at women. Each spike, each shackle, each twisted screw was meant to send a message that the female body was not sacred, not sovereign, not safe, that obedience was survival, that silence was virtue. The breast ripper, the pair of anguish, the iron corset, the bridle, these were not just punishments. They were performances, public rituals designed to strip not only the flesh, but the identity, the dignity, and the spirit from women deemed unruly. And yet they are rarely remembered, reduced to footnotes in textbooks, disguised as curiosities in museums, or rewritten entirely into myths like the Iron Maiden. But we must ask ourselves, what does it say about a society that invents devices just to break women? And more importantly, if we forget these tools, do we also forget the women they silenced?